5 days before Germany's surrender, a coded transmission crackled through the static. Words of gratitude, questions about personal belongings left behind in Hamburg. The German intelligence network believed they were speaking to their most valuable operative in Britain. They were wrong. For nearly the entire conflict, what they celebrated as their greatest triumph had been orchestrated by their enemies, a man whose very existence was a lie. A deception so perfect that it helped redirect the course of history itself. But who was this ghost? And how did a penniless colonial worker become one of the most dangerous operatives the Allies ever deployed? The answer lies in the shadows of occupied Europe, where loyalty was currency and survival meant becoming someone else entirely. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Wolf Dietrich Christian Schmidt entered the world on December 7, 1911, in a coastal town that would later embrace the very regime that would consume his life. After his mother's passing when he was just 8, his strict German father raised him with disapproval that seemed to grow with each passing year. Unlike his taller, fair-haired siblings, Wolf carried darker features that marked him as different in a community that would soon prize conformity above all else. His father's agricultural ambitions for him led to years of hard labor disguised as education, followed by equestrian training in Germany that taught him skills he never imagined would matter. But dreams of military service crumbled against paternal opposition. Instead, 1933 found him working Danish-owned plantations in Argentina for 3 years, before defying his father once more by signing up for banana plantations in the Cameroons. The contract required something that seemed insignificant at the time: membership in the Danish variant of a political party that was spreading across Europe like wildfire. When global conflict erupted in September 1939, it severed Wolf's African existence. By March 1940, he found himself in Hamburg, penniless and frustrated, his promised wages seized by authorities who saw opportunity in every foreign worker. Registration at the immigration office should have been routine. Instead, it became the moment that would reshape everything. The man who introduced himself as Dr. Schultz showed little interest in Wolf's exotic travels or agricultural expertise. Instead, his questions probed deeper territories: observations about ports, knowledge of languages, adaptability under pressure. What Wolf didn't know was that Dr. Schultz was Lieutenant Hakrida, a recruiter for the German military intelligence service known as the Abwehr. The Phoenix Hotel meeting that followed would determine whether Wolf Schmidt continued his unremarkable existence or disappeared into something far more dangerous. Dr. Schultz painted an appealing picture: official employment with a Copenhagen company, travel throughout Europe, steady income for a man whose pockets contained nothing but lint and disappointment. The first 2 missions seemed straightforward enough: report on economic conditions and civilian morale in England and Denmark. Simple observation work that felt more like journalism than espionage. Then Germany invaded Denmark on April 9, 1940, and everything changed. Dr. Schultz returned with a proposal that made Wolf's blood run cold. Britain, infiltration, intelligence gathering behind enemy lines during wartime. When Wolf hesitated, sensing the weight of what was being asked, Schultz's tone shifted. A gentle reminder about mounting debts, limited alternatives, the kind of pressure that transforms reluctance into acceptance. Wolf Schmidt was about to become someone else entirely. Transformation into an operative required months of intensive preparation alongside Swedish agent Gösta Karoli, Morse code until his fingers moved without conscious thought. Ciphers that turned plain language into unbreakable puzzles. radio telegraphy that could pierce the darkness between occupied territories and enemy soil. Their instructor demanded perfection. 100 characters per minute transmission, 80 characters reception, weather patterns, map reading, military recognition. Every skill needed to become invisible in hostile territory. The Abwehr's intelligence requirements read like a shopping list for invasion: airbase locations, troop movements, civilian morale, food supplies, factory production. Most crucially, weather reports that could determine the fate of aircraft and naval operations. Wolf Schmidt was being groomed as one small part of Operation Lena, the intelligence-gathering network designed to support Germany's planned September 1940 invasion of Britain. On August 25, 1940, Agent 3725 received his final briefing. Codename Leonard. Promised 72,000 Reichsmarks and colonial employment after victory. His family would receive 10,000 Reichsmarks if he never returned. Harry Williamson became his new identity, the only English name he could recall from his Cameroon years. The mission parameters were devastatingly simple: infiltrate Britain, establish radio contact, provide continuous intelligence on military preparations and civilian morale. But would Leonard ever reach his destination? The journey to England began with delays that might have been omens. Fellow Agent Caroline carelessly revealed their mission to a servant girl, forcing the Abwehr to resort to threats of physical violence against both the girl and her father. Bad weather pushed the operation back by an entire month. Finally, on September 19, 1940, at 10 in the evening, Wolf departed Brussels aboard a German aircraft. 90 minutes later, Agent 3725 made his first and only parachute jump over Cambridgeshire. The landing was catastrophic. He struck the ground hard east of Willingham Village, 10 miles north of Cambridge, becoming entangled in telephone lines that injured his hand and sprained his ankle. His descent had brought him remarkably close to an air defense command post near Royal Air Force Oakington, just 100 yards from a manned searchlight specifically watching for arrivals like him. Lying low through the night, Wolf concealed his equipment with desperate improvisation: parachute in a haystack, harness in a roadside ditch, radio transmitter under a hedge, everything hidden, everything wrong. His morning visit to Willingham Village for supplies immediately triggered suspicion. Foreign accent, unfamiliar face, the act of washing his feet at the village water pump in a community on high alert for German infiltrators. When a local demanded identification and called the Home Guard, Wolf's brief career as a German operative effectively ended. The 3 Tons pub became his interrogation center. By lunchtime, county police transferred him to Cambridge Police Station. From there, his destination was Camp 020 at Latchmere House in West London, a detention center where suspected enemy agents disappeared into the sophisticated psychological machinery of British counterintelligence. Lieutenant Colonel Robin Stevens, known as Tin Eye for his monocle, had cultivated a reputation for extracting truth without physical violence. Understanding that reliable intelligence required psychological breaking rather than crude brutality, he had transformed Latchmere House into something approaching psychological theater. But the British possessed a crucial advantage that Wolf couldn't have anticipated. Gosta Caroly had been captured shortly after his own landing on September 6th and quickly agreed to work for his captors. During his interrogation, Caroly revealed Wolf Schmidt's impending arrival, allowing Military Intelligence Section 5 to prepare a reception committee. Wolf's initial interrogation began with his carefully rehearsed cover story. Fled Denmark by fishing boat after confronting a German soldier. Seeking refuge in Britain. simple refugee narrative designed to deflect suspicion. Then his interrogators presented him with a transcript of Caroline's full confession. Realizing deception was impossible, Wolf cursed that swine Caroline and agreed to cooperate completely with the British. His decision emerged not from idealism or heroism, but from pure survival instinct and self-preservation. Under the leadership of Major Tar Robertson, Wolf provided a complete accounting of his training, including his cipher codes and communication protocols. A few days later, on September 22nd, he accompanied a recovery team to collect his stashed equipment, including the radio transmitter and cipher wheel that would become tools of British deception. Despite his circumstances, Wolf remained remarkably cheerful, earning him the code name Agent Tate after comedian Harry Tate. The transformation was complete. Leonard was gone. Agent Tate was born. The transformation from captured spy to double agent required more than just switching sides. It demanded psychological reconstruction under the guidance of experts who understood that broken men tell better lies than loyal ones. Lieutenant Colonel Robin Stevens had refined psychological interrogation into an art form at Camp 020. His methods avoided physical brutality, not from humanitarian concerns, but because pain produced unreliable intelligence. Fear, isolation, and carefully applied mental pressure yielded far superior results. Wolf Schmidt found himself subjected to techniques designed to shatter his sense of identity. Sleep deprivation alternated with overwhelming kindness. Interrogators who spoke his native Danish, followed by others who pretended not to understand him at all. Reality became fluid when your captors controlled every aspect of your existence. The British possessed advantages Wolf couldn't have imagined. Through ultra-decrypts from Bletchley Park, they were reading German communications in near real time. They knew what the Abwehr expected from their agents before those agents received their instructions. This intelligence goldmine allowed Military Intelligence Section 5 to craft responses that exceeded German expectations while serving British strategic objectives. Every transmission Wolf would send had already been anticipated, analyzed, and weaponized. But the psychological pressure extended beyond interrogation. Wolf had to genuinely believe in his new role to make it convincing. Doubt would transmit through radio waves as surely as Morse code. His German handlers needed to sense authentic commitment from their agent, even as he worked to destroy everything they represented. The process of psychological conversion took weeks. Wolf Schmidt had to become genuinely invested in British victory while maintaining emotional connection to his German identity. Only this internal contradiction would produce the authentic voice his handlers expected to hear. Agent Tate represented everything British counterintelligence could have hoped for in a double agent. Captured immediately after arrival, before any communication with German handlers. This allowed the double-cross system to control his entire relationship with the Abwehr from the beginning. Though motivated primarily by survival rather than ideology, the British recognized they could fully control his communications, even if they couldn't completely trust his motivations. The double-cross system emerged from Military Intelligence Section 5's recognition that captured German agents offered more value as controlled sources than as executed prisoners. The 20 Committee, formed January 2, 1941, and chaired by Oxford historian John Cecil Masterman, controlled approximately 120 such double agents. The system's objective was elegant in its simplicity: fully control German intelligence operations in Britain while supporting Bletchley Park's ultra operations. By understanding German intentions, they could deceive the enemy with disinformation designed to thwart attacks and gain strategic advantage. Agent Tate's first mission began in mid-October 1940 reporting back to the Abwehr exactly what they wanted to hear. An equal mixture of fabricated information and harmless truth that would maintain credibility while serving British interests. His cover job working on a farm provided perfect justification for limited mobility and restricted access to sensitive military information. By year's end, he had transmitted at least 38 reports, mixing accurate weather data with misleading intelligence on aircraft production and invasion defenses. But would the deception hold under increasing German demands? Every transmission Agent Tate sent required meticulous preparation that balanced truth with deception in proportions calculated to maintain credibility while serving British interests. The art lay not in pure fabrication, but in the careful selection and shading of genuine information. His radio schedule became a lifeline that connected him to handlers who believed they were receiving intelligence from their most valuable British operative. Transmission times were predetermined to avoid detection by British radio direction finding equipment that the Germans assumed was hunting their agent. The irony was perfect. British operators were indeed monitoring every transmission, but as quality control rather than counterintelligence. Each message Wolf sent was first composed by 20 committee specialists, then transmitted using his distinctive Morse code signature that German operators had learned to recognize. Wolf's technique on the telegraph key was as unique as a fingerprint. Speed variations, character spacing, and subtle timing patterns created an electronic signature impossible to forge. German radio operators could identify their agents by transmission style alone, making it crucial that Wolf personally send every message to maintain authenticity. The cipher system added another layer of complexity. Wolf used a book cipher based on a popular novel, with page and word coordinates determining letter substitutions. British cryptographers had cracked the system within days of his capture, allowing them to compose messages that would decrypt perfectly while containing carefully crafted disinformation. But radio communication carried constant risks. Transmission too frequently, and British direction-finding equipment might theoretically locate him. Transmit too rarely, and German handlers might suspect communication problems or compromise. Every message had to justify its own existence while advancing larger deception objectives. The technical challenge of maintaining his cover extended beyond radio work. Wolf needed to demonstrate knowledge only a field agent could possess, requiring him to genuinely visit locations and observe details that would add authenticity to his reports. His British handlers had to balance operational security with the need for convincing intelligence. Weather reports represented his most valuable contribution to German operations, and ironically, his most dangerous work for British security. Accurate meteorological intelligence was essential for German air and naval operations, but also crucial for British defensive preparations. The solution was elegant. Wolf transmitted completely accurate weather data, but always 24 to 48 hours delayed. German operations received genuine intelligence that perfectly described conditions that were no longer operationally relevant. The reports Agent Tate transmitted under 20 committee direction impressed the Abwehr hierarchy beyond their wildest expectations. He proved instrumental in persuading the Germans to plan an attack on the de Havilland aircraft factory at Hatfield, which became its own elaborate deception operation. After only 6 weeks in the field, Agent 3725 was recommended for the Iron Cross Second Class for his services to the fatherland. The irony was perfect. Germany was preparing to decorate a British asset for betraying German interests. Unlike other Allied double agents like Garbo and Brutus, who managed vast fictitious networks of sub-agents, Agent Tate was designed as a solitary operator. This limited the scope of false intelligence he could transmit, leading to the creation of Mary, supposedly a farmer's daughter working in the Admiralty Cipher Department. Through Mary, Tate could access valuable naval intelligence to pass back to Germany. Every detail fabricated, every transmission designed to serve British strategic objectives. Although British intelligence funded the operation, Wolf had to maintain the appearance of needing operational funds from Germany. Initially, he received smuggled money from Caroline, but after Caroline's attempted escape removed him from the double-cross system, Agent Tate reported dire financial straits to his handlers. This played perfectly into Operation Midas, a scheme devised by Yugoslav playboy agent Tricycle, known as Duško Popov. In 1941, Popov convinced the Abwehr to deposit dollars in American banks in exchange for pounds in England by posing as a Jewish businessman, transferring his fortune from England to the United States. The result was £85,000 flowing into British coffers. Germany was funding British intelligence operations, and Agent Tate received his share of funds that allowed him to continue working against his former masters. Unlike other Allied double agents who managed extensive networks of fictional sub-agents, Agent Tate was designed as a solitary operator whose limitations would make his intelligence more credible. A lone farmer with restricted mobility couldn't reasonably access high-level military intelligence, making his occasional valuable reports more believable. This constraint led to the creation of Mary, supposedly a farmer's daughter working in the Admiralty Cipher Department, who had become romantically involved with Wolf's Harry Williamson persona. Through Mary, Agent Tate could access naval intelligence that would otherwise be impossible for his cover identity to obtain. Mary's fictional existence required careful development. She needed personal history, work patterns, security clearance limitations, and emotional motivations that would explain her willingness to share classified information with her farmer boyfriend. British intelligence crafted a complete psychological profile for a woman who existed only in Agent Tate's transmissions. The relationship dynamics had to feel authentic to German handlers who understood human psychology. Mary was portrayed as conflicted about sharing information, occasionally refusing Wolf's requests or providing incomplete intelligence when her conscience troubled her. These refusals made her subsequent disclosures more credible. But maintaining fictional relationships proved psychologically taxing for Wolf, who had to genuinely invest in characters who existed only to serve deception operations. He developed emotional connections to his own fabrications, creating internal relationships with people who lived only in his transmissions to enemy handlers. The financial aspects of his operation created additional complications. British intelligence funded Agent Tate's activities, but he needed to maintain the appearance of requiring operational funds from Germany to preserve his credibility as their agent. Initial funding came through Gösta Karolyi before his attempted escape removed him from the double-cross system. When Agent Tate reported dire financial straits to his German handlers, it perfectly positioned him to benefit from Operation Midas, one of the conflict's most audacious financial deceptions. Operation Midas emerged from the creative mind of Duško Popov, the Yugoslav playboy agent known as Tricycle, who convinced the Abwehr to deposit dollars in American banks in exchange for pounds in England. Popov posed as a Jewish businessman, seeking to transfer his fortune from England to the United States, creating a financial pipeline that ultimately funneled £85,000 into British intelligence coffers. Germany was literally funding British intelligence operations designed to defeat German strategic objectives. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes hadn't been measured in human lives and national survival. Prior to Operation Midas, when Agent Tate was genuinely strapped for cash, the Abwehr dispatched Agent Karl Richter to provide funds and new crystals for his radio equipment. But Richter carried a secondary mission that made Wolf's blood run cold. Verification that their agent was playing with a straight bat. In a 1941 radio transmission, Wolf had referenced the Phoenix Hotel, which raised red flags among German handlers, since this was one of their secret meeting venues in Hamburg. They needed to determine whether their agent had been careless or had revealed something more sinister. Agent Tate had little to fear. Richter proved a hopeless operative who wandered the British countryside for days after his parachute landing, surviving on chocolate and whiskey after mistakenly burying his food supplies along with his parachute. His arrest was inevitable, and his character made him useless to the 20 Committee. Richter met his end at the gallows, and news of his capture and final punishment was fed back to Germany. The Germans sent no one else to check on their agent, but this didn't mean Agent Tate lived carefreely. He existed in constant fear of compromise. Any member of his immediate circle could betray him. When Agent Snow, another double-cross operative, admitted to the Germans that he was acting under British control, fears mounted that Tate and others could be exposed. Nevertheless, Schmidt pressed forward with work that by 1942 consisted mainly of weather reports and forecasts essential for German air and naval operations against Britain. The Abwehr became increasingly preoccupied with Allied glider movements and British food production, seeking locations of underground food stores. In response, Schmidt transmitted fabricated information about fictional food stores, rationing procedures, and production statistics that seemed mundane but formed crucial components of the broader Allied disinformation system. Prior to Operation Midas, when Agent Tate genuinely needed operational funds, the Abwehr dispatched Agent Karl Richter to provide money and new radio crystals. But Richter carried a secondary mission that threatened to expose the entire British deception operation. Verification that their agent was operating independently and hadn't been compromised. The crisis began with Wolf's careless reference to the Phoenix Hotel in a 1941 transmission. German handlers immediately recognized this as one of their secret Hamburg meeting venues, raising the terrifying possibility that their agent had been compromised and was transmitting under British control. The Abwehr's response was swift and systematic. Richter received detailed instructions to verify Agent Tate's independence through a series of tests designed to expose any signs of British manipulation. His mission parameters included observing Wolf's behavior, testing his knowledge of current German intelligence priorities, and most dangerously, conducting surprise verification procedures. But Karl Richter proved spectacularly unsuited for covert operations behind enemy lines. After his parachute landing, he wandered the British countryside for days, surviving on chocolate and whiskey after mistakenly burying his food supplies along with his parachute. His behavior attracted immediate attention from local authorities who had been trained to identify exactly his type of suspicious activity. Richter's capture was inevitable, but his character made him completely useless to the 20 Committee. Unlike Wolf Schmidt, who possessed the psychological flexibility to serve new masters, Richter remained rigidly committed to German victory, regardless of personal consequences. British interrogators quickly determined that Richter couldn't be turned into a productive double agent. His personality combined ideological fanaticism with operational incompetence, making him more liability than asset for any intelligence organization. Richter's fate was sealed by his own inflexibility. He refused all opportunities to cooperate with British intelligence, maintaining loyalty to a regime that had sent him on a suicide mission with inadequate preparation and support. The final punishment came swiftly, and news of Richter's capture and elimination was carefully crafted for transmission back to German handlers. The message needed to explain why their verification agent had failed, while reinforcing confidence in Agent Tate's continued operations. British intelligence portrayed Richter's mission as compromised by his own operational errors rather than systematic British counterintelligence success. This preserved the fiction that isolated German agents could still operate successfully in Britain if they possessed adequate training and discipline. The Germans accepted this explanation and sent no further verification missions, effectively ending the most serious threat to Agent Tate's continued operations. But the crisis left Wolff in constant fear of future verification attempts that might prove more competently executed. By June 1943, the Abwehr was pressuring Schmidt to travel more extensively for reconnaissance reports. Working as a farmhand in rural England limited his access to valuable intelligence, so Military Intelligence Section 5 arranged for him to work as a photographer in Watford. This offered him relief from the monotony of telegraph transmissions, while providing opportunities to feed more varied information back to the Abwehr. But German messages to Tate suddenly decreased, raising renewed concerns that his cover might have been compromised. Setting these worries aside, British handlers kept Tate active on the possibility he could prove useful in future operations. He had already transmitted disinformation supporting Operation Cockade and Plan Ironside. Soon, he would participate in the most sophisticated deception campaign in intelligence history. Operation Bodyguard. The umbrella plan to conceal the Normandy landings represented the pinnacle of Allied deception operations, and Agent Tate's contribution, while perhaps not central, was nonetheless significant. In January 1944, he delivered a remarkable intelligence coup, reporting Eisenhower's arrival in England a full 48 hours before its official announcement. This scoop impressed his German masters and re-solidified their complete trust in their finest British operative. A key aspect of Bodyguard involved presenting D-Day preparations as lagging behind schedule. Tate contributed by disseminating disinformation about production delays of invasion boats and supposed needs for additional troop retraining, though these narratives became harder to maintain as large-scale rehearsals took place across Britain. When Germans pressed him for reports on bomber formations around Cambridge, Tate strategically resisted, explaining the difficulty and danger of investigating military airfields as a photographer based 2 hours away in Watford. His reasoning was accepted, allowing him to avoid providing information about Allied air power in the lead-up to the landings. Agent Tate's work during 1942 and 43 revealed shifting German intelligence priorities that reflected their deteriorating strategic position. Initial requests for military installation locations and troop movements gradually gave way to more desperate inquiries about British food production, civilian morale, and economic sustainability. The Abwehr's preoccupation with British food supplies indicated German recognition that the conflict had become a war of attrition. They needed to understand whether Britain could maintain civilian and military nutrition levels sufficient to sustain prolonged resistance. Wolff responded with carefully fabricated reports about fictional underground food storage facilities, rationing effectiveness, and agricultural production statistics. These seemingly mundane details formed crucial components of German strategic planning, making accurate intelligence potentially decisive for their continued resistance. The psychological aspects of his reporting proved equally important. German handlers pressed him for detailed assessments of British civilian morale, seeking signs of war weariness that might translate into political pressure for negotiated peace. Agent Tate's responses painted a picture of British determination undermined by subtle signs of strain. His report suggested that while British resolve remained strong, careful German pressure applied at the right moments might create opportunities for favorable peace negotiations. These morale assessments required genuine observation of British civilian attitudes, forcing Wolfe to develop authentic understanding of the society he was supposedly working to undermine. His daily interactions with ordinary British citizens created unexpected emotional complications as he found himself genuinely appreciating the quiet courage of people enduring extraordinary hardships. The contradiction between his mission and his growing respect for British resilience created internal conflicts that his handlers needed to manage carefully. A double agent who became genuinely sympathetic to his supposed targets might lose the psychological edge necessary for effective deception. By June 1943, German demands for expanded reconnaissance forced changes to Wolfe's operational cover. His work as a farmhand provided insufficient justification for the mobile intelligence gathering his handlers increasingly required. Military Intelligence Section 5 arranged his transition to photography work in Watford, offering cover for travel while providing opportunities to observe and report on a wider range of targets. The photographer's credentials allowed him to visit locations that would have been impossible for a rural farm worker to access legitimately. But the new cover created fresh challenges. Photography required technical equipment and professional relationships that complicated his operational security. Every interaction with colleagues or clients created additional opportunities for accidental exposure of his true activities. The work itself proved unexpectedly satisfying. Wolfe discovered genuine talent for photography that provided psychological relief from the constant stress of maintaining his deceptive existence. For brief moments while focusing on composition and lighting, he could forget the elaborate fiction that defined every other aspect of his life. However, German messages to Agent Tate began decreasing during this period, raising renewed fears that his cover might have been compromised. The reduced communication could indicate German suspicion, operational security changes, or simply shifting intelligence priorities as the conflict entered new phases. British handlers kept Tate active despite these concerns, recognizing that he might prove crucial for future operations, even if his current intelligence value had diminished. His established credibility with German handlers represented an asset too valuable to abandon without compelling reasons. Soon, that asset would prove essential for the most sophisticated deception campaign in military history. Agent Tate played a supporting role in Operation Fortitude, the deception campaign surrounding the Normandy landings. Fortitude South aimed to convince Germans that Normandy was merely a diversion for the main invasion at Pas de Calais. Tate's contribution, though smaller than agents like Garbo or Brutus, provided essential corroborating details. He reported on fictitious air exercises focusing on Calais and provided information from a fictional railway clerk at Ashford Junction about troop movements to embarkation harbors. The first United States Army group, known as FUSAG, was the fictional army commanded by General George Patton, which in reality consisted of nothing more than inflatable tanks and wooden aircraft designed to create the illusion of massive military buildup in southeastern England. For Fortitude North, targeting Norway, Tate reported on British Ambassador Victor Mallett's consultations in London, supporting the fiction that Sweden would be drawn into the conflict. These deceptions reinforced existing German convictions about Norway's strategic importance, maintaining 17 divisions there that could have been deployed elsewhere. Even after the successful Normandy landings, Agent Tate retained an important role. His focus shifted from invasion deception to naval intelligence and countermeasures against Germany's new vengeance weapons. The V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets represented Germany's last desperate attempt to terrorize Britain into submission. But Agent Tate helped turn these weapons against their creators through carefully crafted disinformation campaigns. Operation Bodyguard represented the pinnacle of Allied deception operations, designed to conceal the true location and timing of the cross-channel invasion that would determine the conflict's outcome. Agent Tate's contribution, while not central to the operation, provided crucial supporting details that reinforced larger fictional narratives. The deception campaign required unprecedented coordination between multiple intelligence agencies, military commands, and political leadership across several nations. Every element had to support the central fiction that Allied invasion preparations were both delayed and focused on targets other than Normandy. Agent Tate's first major contribution came in January 1944 with his report of Eisenhower's arrival in England 48 hours before the official announcement. This intelligence coup demonstrated his continued access to high-level military information, re-establishing his credibility with German handlers after months of reduced communication. The scoop's timing was perfect for German intelligence analysis. Eisenhower's appointment as Supreme Allied Commander indicated that invasion preparations were entering their final phases, making accurate intelligence about Allied intentions more critical than ever. A key aspect of Bodyguard involved portraying D-Day preparations as suffering from significant delays and logistical problems. Agent Tate contributed by transmitting disinformation about production shortfalls in landing craft construction and supposed requirements for additional troop training that pushed back invasion timelines. These delay narratives became increasingly difficult to maintain as massive Allied rehearsal operations took place across Britain. Exercise Tiger and other large-scale training events were impossible to conceal, requiring careful explanation that supported rather than contradicted the deception objectives. When German handlers pressed Agent Tate for detailed reports on bomber formations around Cambridge, he strategically resisted their requests, explaining the practical difficulties and security risks involved in photographing military airfields from his base in Watford. This resistance served multiple purposes. It demonstrated appropriate operational caution that enhanced his credibility while avoiding the need to provide accurate intelligence about Allied air power concentrations that could compromise actual invasion preparations. The Fortitude component of Bodyguard specifically aimed to convince German commanders that Normandy represented a diversionary attack preceding the main invasion at Pas de Calais. This deception required creating fictional military units and supporting them with detailed intelligence that would withstand German analysis. Agent Tate played a supporting role in Fortitude South by reporting on fictitious air exercises focused on the Calais region and providing fabricated intelligence from his supposed railway contact at Ashford Junction about troop movements toward embarkation harbors. The 1st United States Army Group, commanded by General George Patton, existed only in German intelligence files and Allied deception materials. FUSAG's fictional existence required massive supporting operations, including inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, and carefully orchestrated radio traffic that created the electronic signature of a real military formation. For Fortitude North, which targeted Norway as a supposed Allied invasion objective, Agent Tate reported on British diplomatic activities that suggested Sweden might be drawn into the conflict. These reports reinforced German assumptions about Norwegian strategic importance that kept 17 divisions stationed there instead of defending against the actual invasion. The psychological sophistication of these operations exceeded anything previously attempted in military history. Every detail had to withstand analysis by competent German intelligence officers who understood Allied capabilities and strategic priorities. Agent Tate became involved in disseminating misinformation about both V1 and V2 campaigns, but his most significant contribution involved deliberately deceiving Germans about impact points. Working alongside agents like Zigzag, Tate exaggerated hits in London's north and west, while understating damage in southern areas. This led German technicians to shorten the rocket's range, causing subsequent strikes to fall in less populated areas. The same strategy applied to V2 rockets, with agents misleading Germans about impact locations and effectiveness. Thanks to operatives like Tate and Zigzag, many thousands of civilian lives were spared during the conflict's final months. But perhaps Tate's most significant deception in the conflict's final stages involved fictional minefields that he began reporting in late 1944. Using information supposedly provided by his reliable naval source Mary, Tate told Germany about extensive fictitious minefields around Britain, particularly concentrated south of Ireland near Fastnet Rock. The intelligence represented the perfect blend of truth and fabrication that had characterized his entire operation. The Allies had indeed deployed over 10,000 Mark 17 mines during 1944 and 45, but not in the specific areas mentioned by Tate. When German U-boat U-1006 was actually sunk by a Canadian frigate southeast of the Faroe Islands on October 16, 1944, Tate falsely reported hearing from a British naval crewman that the submarine had been destroyed in his fictitious minefield south of Ireland. His report included accurate details about 44 survivors being captured, but completely fabricated the cause and location, attributing the sinking to his non-existent minefield. Even after the successful Normandy landings, Agent Tate retained crucial importance as Germany launched its final desperate attempt to terrorize Britain into submission through vengeance weapons. The V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets represented advanced technology deployed in strategically hopeless circumstances, but they still posed genuine threats to civilian populations. British intelligence recognized an opportunity to turn these weapons against their creators through carefully coordinated disinformation campaigns. Agent Tate joined other double agents like Zigzag in systematically misleading German technicians about weapon accuracy and effectiveness. The deception focused on impact point reporting that could influence German targeting calculations. By exaggerating hits in London's northern and western areas while understating damage in southern districts, agents could manipulate German range calculations to redirect subsequent strikes toward less populated areas. This required detailed knowledge of actual impact patterns, combined with sophisticated understanding of German ballistic calculations and targeting procedures. British intelligence needed to provide misinformation that would seem credible to German analysts while producing tactically beneficial results. Agent Tate's reports described fictional V-1 impacts that suggested the weapons were consistently overshooting their intended targets in central London. German technicians responded by shortening the weapons' range settings, causing subsequent strikes to fall in areas with lower civilian population densities. The same strategy applied to V-2 rocket attacks, with agents providing false damage assessments that influenced German targeting priorities. The rockets' ballistic trajectory made them impossible to intercept using available British technology, making deceptive targeting information the only effective countermeasure. The human cost of these weapons remained severe despite British countermeasures. V-1 attacks produced distinctive terror effects as civilians could hear the flying bombs approaching and experience moments of horrific anticipation before impact. V-2 rockets struck without warning, creating different psychological pressures that tested British civilian resilience. Agent Tate's role in countering these attacks represented a form of psychological warfare that balanced immediate tactical benefits against long-term strategic considerations. Every misleading report potentially saved civilian lives while maintaining his credibility for future operations that might prove even more important. The technical challenge involved crafting reports that German analysts would find credible without providing information that might improve weapon accuracy. British intelligence needed to understand German design priorities and operational procedures well enough to manipulate them effectively. Intelligence gathered through ultra-decrypts, provided crucial insights into German weapon development and deployment decisions. British cryptographers were reading German communications about vengeance weapon effectiveness, allowing them to tailor Agent Tate's reports for maximum deceptive impact. The campaign's success became measurable through decreased civilian casualties in areas that would otherwise have received more accurate targeting. While impossible to quantify precisely, intelligence historians estimate that agents like Tate and Zigzag saved thousands of civilian lives during the weapon's deployment period. But Agent Tate's most significant deception during the conflict's final stages involved fictional naval minefields that would create submarine-free zones for Allied convoys when victory was closest and most precious. In March 1945, U-260, another German submarine, was actually sunk by a genuine mine just outside Tate's reported false area. This coincidence completely convinced German Naval Command that Tate's intelligence was absolutely accurate. The result exceeded British expectations. German U-boat command issued warnings for submarines to avoid Tate's reported minefield areas, effectively creating submarine-free zones for Allied convoys during the conflict's critical final months. This represented Agent Tate's last major contribution, but he continued transmitting until the Third Reich's final gasps. On May 2, 1945, just 5 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, Agent Tate received his final message from German intelligence. The transmission carried thanks for his dedicated service and responded to a question he had asked about personal effects left behind in Hamburg years earlier. His handlers never suspected they had been conversing with a double agent whose deceptions had helped shorten the global conflict and saved thousands of Allied lives. After the conflict's end, Wolf Schmidt formally adopted the Harry Williamson identity and settled into seemingly ordinary life in Watford. But he never quite escaped the feeling of being watched, perhaps a natural consequence of years leading double lives. He became increasingly reclusive, installing cameras and listening devices throughout his home, while keeping a special Military Intelligence Section 5 phone number to call should he feel threatened. In 1946, Harry married Irene Renee Esther Meiton, but the marriage proved unhappy from the start, marked by burdens imposed by the Official Secrets Act, which obligated both to remain silent about Harry's wartime activities. Beginning in late 1944, Agent Tate began reporting extensive fictional minefields around British waters, particularly concentrated south of Ireland near Fastnet Rock. These reports represented his most sophisticated deception, combining genuine technical knowledge with fabricated deployment details that would reshape German submarine operations. The intelligence supposedly came from Mary, his reliable Admiralty contact, who provided a perfect mixture of accurate technical specifications and completely false location data. The Allies had indeed deployed over 10,000 Mark 17 mines during 1944 and 45, lending credibility to reports about mining operations. Agent Tate's fictional minefields were positioned in areas that would seem tactically logical to German naval analysts, while creating safe corridors for Allied convoy operations. The deception required detailed understanding of German submarine patrol patterns and strategic priorities. When German U-boat U-1006 was actually sunk by a Canadian frigate southeast of the Faroe Islands on October 16, 1944, Agent Tate seized the opportunity to reinforce his fictional minefield narrative. His report claimed to have heard from a British naval crewman that the submarine had been destroyed in his fictitious minefield south of Ireland. The account included accurate details about 44 survivors being captured, but completely fabricated the cause and location of the sinking. This perfect blend of truth and deception created exactly the kind of mixed intelligence that German analysts found most credible. Accurate casualty figures suggested reliable sources, while the false location information served British strategic objectives. German submarine command had no way to independently verify the sinking's cause and location. Their only sources were Agent Tate's report and whatever limited information they might gather from other intelligence networks or prisoner interrogations. The deception's effectiveness multiplied in March 1945, when U-260, another German submarine, was actually sunk by a genuine mine just outside Agent Tate's reported false minefield area. This extraordinary coincidence completely convinced German Naval Command that their agent's intelligence was absolutely accurate. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for British interests. German submarine operations were entering their final phase, with reduced numbers of operational boats and increasingly desperate tactical situations. Creating artificial restrictions on their movement could produce disproportionate strategic benefits. German U-boat command responded exactly as British intelligence had hoped. They issued comprehensive warnings for submarines to avoid Agent Tate's reported minefield areas, effectively creating submarine-free zones for Allied convoys during the conflict's most critical final months. The operational impact extended beyond simple navigation restrictions. German submarines were forced to use longer, more predictable routes that increased their exposure to Allied anti-submarine warfare assets. Patrol patterns became concentrated in areas where Allied forces could more effectively intercept them. This represented Agent Tate's final major contribution to Allied victory, but he continued transmitting routine intelligence reports until Nazi Germany's complete collapse. His dedication to operational discipline never wavered, even as the Third Reich disintegrated around his German handlers. After the conflict's end, Wolf Schmidt formally adopted the Harry Williamson identity and settled into seemingly ordinary life in Watford. But the psychological conditioning required for years of successful deception couldn't be easily abandoned, leaving him perpetually alert for threats that no longer existed. He became increasingly reclusive, installing security cameras and listening devices throughout his home, while maintaining a special military intelligence Section 5 phone number for emergencies. These precautions reflected the deep paranoia that successful intelligence work had embedded in his personality. In 1946, Harry married Irene Renee Esther Meiton, but the relationship proved troubled from the beginning. The Official Secrets Act created an insurmountable barrier to authentic intimacy, preventing him from sharing the experiences that had most profoundly shaped his identity. Harry continued working as a photographer for the Watford Observer, eventually becoming chief staff photographer while freelancing for national publications like the Daily Mirror. His professional success provided cover for the restless energy that peaceful civilian life couldn't fully satisfy. Photography offered psychological benefits that compensated partially for the loss of his wartime purpose. The technical challenges and creative satisfaction helped distract him from memories of years spent crafting elaborate deceptions that had influenced the fate of nations. His true passions lay in seemingly mundane hobbies like canary breeding, billiards, football, and classical music that provided structure for a life no longer organized around intelligence operations and strategic deception. Despite his efforts to disappear into suburban anonymity, fragments of his extraordinary past slowly surfaced through contacts he couldn't completely control. When a German journalist tracked him down in the early 1960s, Harry reluctantly shared portions of his story. The interview revealed his continued possession of Iron Cross decorations, first and second class, that his brother had retrieved from Hamburg after the conflict. These medals represented official German recognition for services that had actually undermined German strategic objectives throughout the conflict. Later, his participation in protests against Margaret Thatcher's poll tax during the 1990s inadvertently brought him into public attention. Newspapers sensationally described him as a former German operative without understanding the complex realities of his wartime service. Eventually, when the Official Secrets Act no longer bound him to complete silence, Harry chose to collaborate with author Nigel West on a comprehensive account of his experiences. The resulting book, 7 Spies Who Changed the World, was published in 1991 when Harry was facing terminal cancer diagnosis. Harry Williamson passed away on October 19, 1992, at age 80. He had lived as a wartime double agent whose deceptions helped shorten global conflict, but also as a private man haunted by achievements he could never fully share or celebrate. On May 2, 1945, just 5 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, Agent Tate received his final message from German intelligence. The transmission carried formal thanks for his dedicated service throughout the conflict and responded to a practical question he had asked about personal effects left behind in Hamburg years earlier. The message's routine tone reflected the surreal disconnect between rapidly collapsing German command structure and the continued operation of intelligence networks that no longer served any meaningful strategic purpose. His handlers maintained professional courtesy even as their world disintegrated. For Wolf Schmidt, this final communication represented the end of an extraordinary psychological journey that had transformed him from reluctant recruit to master deceiver. Nearly 5 years of continuous deception had reshaped his identity in ways that would affect him for the remainder of his life. The transition from wartime operative to peacetime citizen proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Wolf had spent so long inhabiting fictional personas that returning to authentic self-expression required conscious effort and psychological adjustment. British intelligence faced similar challenges in managing agents whose usefulness had ended with German surrender. The double-cross system had operated approximately 120 double agents, many of whom required psychological support and practical assistance transitioning to normal civilian existence. Agent Tate's case was complicated by his genuine conversion from German loyalist to British asset. Unlike agents who had always opposed German objectives, Wolf had experienced authentic ideological transformation that left him psychologically isolated from both his original and adopted communities. His contribution to Allied victory was measurable, but could never be publicly acknowledged due to the classified nature of double-cross operations. The agents who had helped shorten global conflict and save thousands of lives would disappear into anonymity, their achievements known only to intelligence professionals and military historians. The secrecy requirements created additional psychological burdens for agents who couldn't share their experiences or receive recognition for their sacrifices. Wolf Schmidt would carry the weight of his wartime deceptions in complete isolation for decades after the conflict ended. Agent Tate operated as one of the longest-running double agents for the Allies, transmitting more than 1,000 messages on behalf of British intelligence, while maintaining his deception until the Third Reich's final collapse. A senior Abwehr officer once declared about their agent 3725 that he represented their finest pearl. If he proved false, then the entire necklace would be worthless. Indeed, it was. Wolf Schmidt had become Harry Williamson, who had become Agent Tate, who had become Leonard, who had helped reshape the course of history through deception so perfect that his enemies never suspected they were funding their own defeat. In the shadows of occupied Europe, where loyalty became currency and survival meant becoming someone else entirely, one man's willingness to transform himself had helped determine the fate of nations. The ghost had finally found peace,